Hello, statisticians. It's not Mr. Youngsaver, it's Mr. Taylor. I want to do a shout out to Skew the Script 4.1. It's really good, so if you haven't watched it, go watch it. There's a lot of concepts there. I'm going to go over a few more that are in the book here. 4.2 is actually an exercise which you will eventually do in Desmos. But I'm going to do something a little different here. I think everybody knows how much I love our book. I don't typically love books, but I really like our book. I think it's really well organized. There are lots of good pictures in it, and since half of the problems are in the back, you can always check yourself. And since probably a third of the problems, there are videos in Sapling via Clever, you can kind of go get explanation. So the bell's going to ring in like 10 minutes, so I'm not going to take more than 10 minutes. So when you hear the bell, I'm going to stop. We've already talked about sampling and surveys. The idea with sampling is, once again, you have some population that you could go do a census of to find out something like their likes and dislikes, but that's often very expensive and time consuming. So instead, we often take a sample to estimate their likes or dislikes or average or things like that. And then we infer what do we think, based on the sample, the characteristics of the population are. And there are many hazards with doing that, but it's also a method that we use to estimate different things without talking to everything or gathering every last subject related to the population. Okay, so good story there you could read. Here's the thing about the Federalist Papers, which is kind of like our Beyonce exercise. And, how to sample badly. We talked a little bit about convenience sampling. That's like me just taking the first 10 people who walk in the door, or maybe just surveying everyone in the class and then saying that's true for the whole school, which it certainly wouldn't be. It might be representative of all AP Stat students, but it certainly wouldn't be representative of the population of the whole school. And in fact, if I do that, I create what's called bias. I am either overestimating or underestimating that particular value. Like if I asked our class, how much homework do you get? I would most likely be overestimating that average for the whole school. If I asked how much sleep you get, I might be underestimating it because you guys might get a lot less sleep because you're working on all your AP classes. So bias is anything that introduces some kind of overestimate or underestimate of what we actually are trying to get. Voluntary response is one way that we get bias because we are not really getting the entire population. We are getting the subset of the population that is willing to actually take a survey that maybe they saw on the internet or was handed to them on the street or something like that. So voluntary response is always a problem. It doesn't mean you can't use that data, but you have to be very wary of the data. And there's a very funny story about Bodie McBoatface in an internet. You should go read it. How to sample well. So our gold standard is a simple random sample where every person in the population has an equal chance of being included in the sample. And what it says exactly there is random sampling involves using a chance process to determine members of a population which are included in the sample. And a simple random sample, which is probably on the next page, yes, is one where for a size n chosen in such a way that every group of individuals in the population has an equal chance to be selected as a sample. So once again, everyone has an equal likelihood of being chosen to be in the sample. That is a true, simple random sample. And where bias comes in is where somehow you didn't think about how you were including people and certain groups get overrepresented or underrepresented. There's some examples of how to do it with technology and some discussion of without replacement and with replacement. And there's something we'll eventually do is you can actually do this with a table, but it's a little weird how to use it. And I will eventually show you because it's always an AP exam question, but this is a table of random numbers and you can use it to randomly assign people, maybe ticket holders for the Justin Timberlake concert. And there's actually an example in here of how you would do it if you want to go read it. Let's see. So I'm hoping you've done the Justin Timberlake exercise in Desmos. There was stratified random sampling there where we got either like one person out of every column or two people out of every row is I believe how we did it. So we got 10 depending on how we did that, and there was advantages and disadvantages to both those methods. There's also what's called cluster sampling, which also, I think that's where we got two entire columns. So we got a cluster, and therefore we had a little bit of everybody, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth row from two different small subsets. And there's advantages to that, of doing clustering and strata, because it makes sure you're going to include certain criteria. And what they talk about in the book a lot is in high school, it's if you were going to survey people, you might want to stratify across class, because freshmen and seniors are going to have very different opinions and characteristics. And so that you might want to stratify a sample of 40 where you got 10 freshmen and 10 seniors and 10 juniors and 10 sophomores, and of course randomly sampling within those larger groups. Systematic random sampling is kind of interesting. It's where you number everybody. You start on some number and then you go every K individuals. And the example in the Justin Timberlake was you started on some seat and then you counted over every 7 seats. And then when you got to the end, you wrapped back around to the beginning. We talked a little bit about undercoverage is one thing that can go wrong. It's where you think you are covering the population, but somehow you're missing a group. This happens a lot in elections. We think we're covering the whole country, but instead we're covering people of just a certain type, including those who will answer their phone and answer questions. Non-response is another problem because the people who don't respond have certain characteristics, whereas people who do respond have different characteristics. So we're not actually sampling the entire population the way we think we are. We are getting some weird subset of people who are responders versus non-responders. And then response bias is specifically, there's some good examples in here, but possibly even the way you've worded a question will cause people to answer differently. Whereas if you had a more neutral question, they'll answer one way. And I think there was a really funny one in the Skew the Script where he talked about Guy Fieri in very positive terms and Alton Brown, whom I love, in very negative terms. And obviously people would probably choose the one that's referred to more positively. Okay, and then we're at the summary. So I'm about 7 minutes in. Once again, kind of a reminder of all the terms here, really important that you know what all these are. And I'm going to look at 2 problems and then be done. So I'm going to pick the very first problem. A large retailer prepares its customers' monthly credit bills using an automatic machine that folds the bills, stuffs them into envelopes, and seals the envelopes for mailing. Are the envelopes completely sealed? Inspectors choose 40 envelopes at random from 1,000 stuffed each hour for visual inspection. Identify the population in the sample. So that's the kind of question you might get. I'll put something in the Edpuzzle, and I'm just going to jump over to this one, and I think we'll be done. How much sleep do high school students get on a typical school night? Counselor designed a survey to find out. To make the data collection easier, the counselor surveyed the first 100 students to arrive at school on a particular morning. These students reported an average of 7.2 hours of sleep on the previous night. What type of sample did the counselor obtain? And explain why the sampling method is biased. Is 7.2 hours probably greater than or less than the true amount of sleep last night for students at the school? Why? And I got 1 minute left. I'm going to jump way ahead. Let's do a multiple choice. Okay, let's do an even, because you don't get the answers to those. Where's a good even? Oh, there's. To gather information about the validity of a new standardized test for the 10th grade students in a particular state, a random sample of 15 high schools were selected from the state. The new test was administered for every 10th grade student in the selected high schools. What kind of sample is this? A simple random sample, A. B, a stratified random sample, C, a cluster sample, D, a systematic random sample, or E, a voluntary response sample. Okay, bell rang. I'm going to kill it. Thanks.